fam, what's poppin'? I hope everybody had an amazing Mother's Day weekend. We are still in the NBA playoffs. We're still discussing what's happening in the NBA playoffs. And I don't know about you guys, but I often get exhausted with listening to NBA commentators and analysts have these nonsensical conversations about athletes and provide very little context, but very predictable assessments and evaluations of athletes and why teams aren't performing the way they are and why guys are behaving the way they are. And so, as always, I like to provide additional perspective. And so, one of the things that I've been finding really interesting is the conversation around Jaylen Brown right now. He came out in his postseason conference and talked about how this was his favorite season because he was a top 5 MVP candidate this year. He was a guy who averaged, I think, maybe 29 points a game. He increased their win shares. He single-handedly led Boston to a number 2 seed in the East on a roster that, for the bulk of the season, missed Jason Tatum to an Achilles injury, and quite frankly didn't really have any other guys who are notable enough to move the needle on that roster. Peyton Pritchard is great, Sam Hauser's great, Nehemiah Queta is great, but I mean, let's be real. And so there's been a lot of reservation and pushback to Jaylen Brown's discussion around his season this past year, and I think a lot of that pushback towards Jaylen Brown has been consistent to the pushback that he's received since he's been drafted, which is, one, I still don't think that the NBA, in really any corporate setting, is prepared to invest in, support, and empower black men who are talented, intelligent, and vocal. Now, if you're extremely talented and extremely intelligent, but you're not very vocal, well, then it's not much of an issue, right? Or if you're extremely talented and you're extremely vocal, but you're not really that intelligent, it's not that much of an issue. But to be all three, that is always an issue. And so, not minimizing his circumstance to just race and the reception that he receives from the media to just race, because Jaylen Brown also can be guilty of sometimes speaking with his ego, right? And as fans, we can very easily identify when an athlete is speaking with their ego. And he can be guilty of that, right? But it doesn't negate the fact that he has justified not only his salary and his value to their organization, but he's justified us having a different type of conversation about him as a 1A superstar. And I think he is somebody who desires to be a 1A superstar in a time where a lot of guys don't. A lot of guys don't want to take on the responsibility of not just leading the team on the floor, but also having to serve as, the leader of that organization off the floor and in press conferences and in the media, et cetera, et cetera. And so I'm saying all of this to say that we need to give Jaylen Brown more grace. And we need to consider the context of his circumstance around the conversations right now that we're having about him. If at your employer, wherever you work, if this year you maybe work alongside, a colleague who is at the same status of you, or maybe you have a supervisor, and let's say you lose that colleague or that supervisor, and then you take on their duties, roles, and responsibilities as well. You don't get an increase in pay for doing it, right? And quite frankly, you don't really get a whole lot of credit. But you take on their duties and responsibilities as well, and you do an exceptional job. You blow it out the water. And then everybody comes back and they say, we don't really care. We didn't really care that much that you went above and beyond and managed not only your personal responsibilities, but also this other person's. How would you feel? All right, what kind of things would you be saying about the organization you work for? Right? right? What kind of transitions would you be looking to make? Because we do it all the time in our professional lives. But then we have a reservation about athletes doing it. It's the same. So just provide additional context to the Jaylen Brown situation. And I love engaging in discourse, especially about topics like these. So if you got comments, please hit that comment section. Let's talk.